Good morning. A strong majority of Albertans elected this government because of our commitment to repeal the NDP carbon tax. We agree with them that there are better ways to help the environment than by punishing people for living ordinary lives, for heating their homes and driving to work. We kept that commitment with our first law as a government, Bill Number 1, the Carbon Tax Repeal Act, which was passed in May of 2019. Instead of burdening Alberta families and workers, we put the onus on large emitters to invest in cleaner technology to reduce emissions. The federal Liberal government then stepped in and imposed their carbon tax on Alberta on the 1st of January last year. We committed to building a coalition of provinces opposed to this job-killing federal carbon tax and to challenge its constitutionality in court. We kept that commitment too, joining Saskatchewan and Ontario in defending our taxpayers and our province's constitutional jurisdiction through judicial references to our respective courts of appeal. We've then been joined by Quebec, New Brunswick, and Manitoba, a coalition representing 80% of the Canadian population. Just over a year ago, Alberta's Court of Appeal rendered its decision on our judicial reference, deciding in a 4-1 judgment that the federal tax is unconstitutional. Alberta's appeal court ruled in a very important judgment that the federal carbon tax is a, quote, constitutional Trojan horse, that under the guise of fighting carbon emissions would give the federal government potentially unlimited power over provincial regulations, unquote. The Alberta court further stated, quotes, that the federal and provincial governments are co-equals, each level of government being supreme within its sphere. The federal government is not the parent, and the provincial governments are not its children, unquote. The court further concluded that, quotes, the legal and practical effects of the federal carbon tax directly intrude on provincial powers, including their exclusive jurisdiction to develop and manage their natural resources, unquote. The Alberta Court of Appeal underscored the broader implications of the federal effort to anchor its carbon tax in the Peace, Order, and Good Government Clause in the Constitution Act, Section 91. And they did so saying that what is authorized under the Federal Carbon Tax Act indefinitely to the future and in the sole unfettered discretion of the executive is endlessly expansive. The executive's authority is also open-ended and largely subjective, unquote. So, of course, the federal government appealed that decision to the Supreme Court of Canada, which released its judgment today. We are obviously disappointed with that decision. The Supreme Court ignored the Alberta Court of Appeal's warning and discovered a new federal power that erodes provincial jurisdiction and undermines our constitutional federal system. We'll take time to study that decision in detail. I do appreciate the 3 thoughtful dissenting opinions, including that of Mr. Justice Russell Brown, which warns that, quote, the true danger in the majority's reasons lies in its abandonment of any meaningful constraint on federal power, unquote. We also agree with Madam Justice Suzanne Cote that, quotes, the federal carbon tax employs a discretionary scheme that knows no bounds, unquote. The best we can hope for is that the Supreme Court has invented a one-time only carbon pricing exception to the constitutional order. We'll continue to fight to defend our exclusive provincial power to regulate our resource industries that is guaranteed in Section 92A of the Constitution, which was a condition of Alberta signing on to the patriation of the Constitution back in 1982. Albertans will continue to defend jobs, our economy, and our constitutional authority. That is why we're not deterred in any of the other defenses of Alberta's interests by today's decision. We'll continue to press our case challenging Bill C-69, the federal No More Pipelines law, which is currently before the Alberta Court of Appeal. We'll also listen to and consult with Albertans and our allied provinces on our next steps on the carbon tax. We'll do everything in our power to minimize the costs on Albertans and on our trade-exposed industries that must compete globally, while at the same time we continue to ensure that we responsibly reduce emissions from Alberta. In this context, I would note that the federal government has accepted far less costly emissions policies in other provinces than either the NDP Alberta carbon tax or the federal Liberal carbon tax. So, for example, Quebec's cap and trade scheme imposes a cost of approximately $20 per ton, while the federal carbon tax is scheduled to go up to $40 a ton next week, increasing eventually to at least $170 a ton. That is an inequity that we cannot abide. Alberta has been a true leader in environmental responsibility. We were the first province in Canada and the first jurisdiction in North America to apply a levy to industrial greenhouse gas emissions. Alberta's government has supported the development of world-class technology that has helped the Canadian oil sands to reduce the carbon footprint of a barrel of bitumen by 30% over the past 2 decades. We continue to support the growing efforts of major Alberta energy producers to achieve their goal of net zero carbon emissions by 2050, in part through Alberta's Technology, Innovation and Emissions Reduction, or TIER program. We've demonstrated a real willingness to work with the national government where we can find common ground to address the challenge of climate change through practical steps to reduce emissions, including through our equivalency agreements for our emissions reduction program and for better provincial methane regulations that are saving Alberta businesses hundreds of millions of dollars compared to where they would have been under federal regulations. And we are now in advanced discussions with the Government of Canada and the energy industry over a potential massive expansion of carbon capture, utilization and storage, which could be a real game changer, as well as pursuing potential small modular nuclear reactors and other game-changing technologies substantially to cut emissions without making Canada's largest industry, our energy sector, uncompetitive. We'll continue to do our part to secure a strong future for Canada's energy industry while supporting that industry in reducing emissions. Finally, I'd like to thank our allied provinces, again representing 80% of the country's population, who stood with Albertans in defending our economies and the place of strong provinces in Canada's federation. Thank you to the governments of Ontario, Quebec, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and New Brunswick. A strong Canada needs strong provinces standing up for each other and for the Constitution, for the Federation, and will continue to do so proudly on behalf of Albertans. And with that, I'm happy to take questions, and in responding to questions, I'm also joined by Minister of Environment and Parks, Jason Nixon, Minister of Energy, Sonia Savage, and Minister of Justice, Casey Madhu.
Thank you, Premier. We'll now go to the phones. We'll do 2 questions each. You can either choose to do 1 question, 1 follow-up, or take both your questions right off the top. With that, operator, can you please put through our first caller?
Emma Graney, Globe and Mail.
Yeah, g'day, Premier. So you said there that Alberta will continue to fight here when it comes to the carbon tax. How do you plan to do that? What are the next steps?
Well, what I've said is that obviously, while we are disappointed with this decision, we have to respect that it's a majority decision of the Supreme Court of Canada. We are going to consult with Albertans and also talk to our allied provinces to determine the best way forward to protect jobs and the economy in Alberta, to minimize the costs of any future policies on this province. And so there are a number of different options that we will be considering. We will be starting those consultations right away. I do point out that the federal government has permitted different policies that have quite different impacts on provincial economies. Quebec's cap and trade system, for example, has an imputed cost of about $20 a ton versus the federal carbon tax now in effect in Alberta, which has been sustained by this decision, which will go up to $40 a ton on April the 1st. So we're going to be looking at what can we do to minimize the cost to our economy, to taxpayers, and to jobs.
You have a follow-up?
Okay, my second, I do actually. It's a separate question here, but so I guess now that this ruling has been made, would your government consider actually bringing in a Made in Alberta carbon tax to avoid what Ottawa is going to impose on us?
We're going to consider all options here, listen to Albertans and see what they want us to do. Two-thirds of Albertans continue to oppose a carbon tax, and that's why we repealed the NDP carbon tax. While I don't like the federal carbon tax, the truth is that it is, in one sense at least, less costly to Albertans than the Alberta NDP carbon tax. Because that was partly designed to squeeze money out of taxpayers to spend on NDP pet projects like subsidizing low-flow shower heads and light bulbs, also to subsidize the development of renewable energy. We've just demonstrated, there was a study this week demonstrating that Alberta's renewable energy sector is growing faster than in any other part of the country with zero subsidies. So the point is that while notionally 90% of the revenues from the federal carbon tax goes back in rebates, that was not the case under the NDP carbon tax. And one thing Albertans can be sure of is we are not going to use the excuse of this decision or the federal carbon tax to squeeze more money for the government out of Albertans. That was the NDP policy. It's not our approach.
Operator, can you please put through our next caller?
Brian Lilly, Toronto Sun.
Hello, Premier. The use of POG and the national concern doctrine seems to have opened things up pretty wide for the federal government going forward. And while I don't want to put out any crazy ideas of what could happen here, I mean, my read on it is that the federal government is now capable of doing anything that they can defend before the court or before the whatever the going political philosophy of the day is on the court. Do you have concerns about how wide this decision opens this up?
I do, Brian. And Mr. Justice Malcolm Rowe said in his dissenting opinion that this, quotes, turns provincial autonomy on its head and has implications far beyond this legislation. These implications permanently alter the Confederation bargain. Mr. Justice Brown concluded, quotes, that this is a model of federalism that rejects our Constitution and rewrites the rules of Confederation. Its implications go far beyond the Act, opening the door to federal intrusion by way of the imposition of national standards into all areas of provincial jurisdiction. It is bound to lead to serious tensions in the Federation. These are points that the Alberta Appeal Court made in its 4-1 majority decision a year ago. And so we are profoundly concerned about that. But what we are our approach, Brian, is to interpret this as narrowly applying to a unlimited federal power on one issue and one issue alone, which is federal carbon pricing. We are at the Alberta Appeal Court fighting the broader issue about our exclusive provincial jurisdiction to manage our resources under Section 92A. As I suggested in my statement, Brian, my predecessor, Peter Lougheed, only signed on to the patriation of the Constitution back in 1982 because he secured that critical win for resource-producing provinces. It says that provincial legislatures have the exclusive authority to regulate the development of natural resources, including oil and gas, in their provinces. So that is something where we're at the court defending that critical power. I anticipate that will go to the Supreme Court as well. So the way that we are, while we're very concerned about how the door has been opened to a potentially limited exercise of the federal reserve powers over areas of exclusive provincial jurisdiction, I can't believe that the Supreme Court actually means for that to be a new principle of Canadian constitutional law, because, as Justice Rowe says, it would turn the Federation on its head.
Do you have a follow-up, Brian?
Yes, I'd like comments from you, Premier, on this, and I'll go further than I'm sure you will feel comfortable doing, but I've been watching in the court, covering the court for a long time. I've covered some very contentious issues that relate to Quebec defending its jurisdiction. And I cannot think imagine for a moment that the Supreme Court would ever rule in a similar manner on a case that Quebec brought before it. The ruling doctrine of the Supreme Court seems to be, don't upset Quebec, don't upset the Ottawa, Toronto, Montreal triangle. Given what this result will mean for inflaming Western alienation tensions in your province, what are your concerns about the political nature of the Supreme Court and that certain provinces are treated differently when they go before it?
Well, when I was being briefed on the decision this morning, I had a similar observation, Brian, and I was told that, because as you know, Quebec actually did join us as an intervener to support provincial jurisdiction in this reference before the Supreme Court. And apparently, I was told by our lawyers this morning that Mr. Chief Justice Wagner made a very deliberate point, and in responding to Quebec's lawyers, saying that I'm paraphrasing, don't worry, you've already got your cap and trade scheme, you've got your own policy discretion, the rest of this doesn't affect you. So it looks to me, let me put it this way. I think, having worked in Ottawa, it's clear to me that Ottawa elites are much more sensitive to provincial jurisdiction and tensions within the Federation when they emerge from Quebec versus when they emerge from the West. That's hardly a novel observation. I think today's decision underscores that.
Operator, can you please put through our next caller?
Chris Varco, Calgary Herald.
Hi, Premier. I'm just wondering if you could go back to the issue of whether the province will decide to create its own carbon tax. What are going to be the key factors in that decision that you make on whether you do that or not, or leave it as the situation is right now with the federal backstop in place?
The key criteria will be which approach imposes the least damage on jobs and Alberta's economy and the least cost on Alberta families. So that's the key criteria for us, is which policy approach can minimize the cost on Albertans, on Alberta families, and the Alberta economy.
Follow-up, Chris?
Yeah, just going to the battle over C-69 and even the tanker ban fight, does this ruling not undercut your standing, I guess, in your position and your ability to win those cases?
Well, this is a different issue, and the court's decision applies very specifically to what they call an existential threat, and applies to the federal carbon pricing scheme. And it does not apply, in our view, to the broader issue of the regulation of natural resources. Because if a court decides that the feds can use their peace, order, and good government power to step in and clearly violate exclusive enumerated provincial authority to develop our resources under Section 92A, then a court that would make that decision in the future would be deciding that the Constitution does not apply. So to me, that's inconceivable. To me, it's inconceivable that a court would allow the federal government to pull a rabbit out of the constitutional hat to say that the clear meaning of the Constitution over provincial jurisdiction on resources does not exist. So we think we have very strong grounds on that front.
Operator, can you please put through our next caller?
Kenney Trenton, Kicks FM.
Okay, I guess good morning, rather. My first question is about, to whoever's willing to answer this, and that it comes to, obviously this decision. Is there a little bit more concern that with a ruling like this, that the Ottawa government may try and intervene in more areas? Is there ever a concern that they may even try and double down on some of their policies of intruding on provincial jurisdiction?
Yes, absolutely. And that's exactly why we launched our challenge to the constitutionality of the No More Pipelines Law, Bill C-69, because in our view, that law is based on a view that the federal government can bigfoot into this province and do whatever it wants in regulating the development of our economy, particularly our natural resources. Alberta fought an essential battle, and it won a key fight on that issue back in 1982 when we patriated the Constitution. And Peter Lougheed managed to extract from Ottawa, in an agreement with all the provinces, exclusive provincial jurisdiction over the regulation of the development of natural resources, including oil and gas and lumber. That is absolutely essential. And that is why we've launched that challenge. As I said in response to Brian Lilly, I cannot imagine a situation where a court would say that the clear meaning of the Constitution can be violated by the whim of a federal government. So we're going to fight that to the hilt.
Follow-up, Kenney?
Yeah, I do, and I guess it would be for whoever would answer this one. At least in the terms of small modular reactors, because I know up here in the Northwest region, there's a couple of municipalities that have been studying it, and I guess it goes to the point of Alberta creating a diverse energy mix. And just talking about small modular reactors, where is that at right now? And do you see these small modular reactors becoming very prevalent in the province down the road?
Actually, we're going to have some very exciting news on that in the next week or two about Alberta's efforts to get more involved in the development of small modular nuclear reactor technology. I've always been a fan of supporter of nuclear power. It is the cleanest form of power in terms of being zero emitting. It produces zero greenhouse gas emissions. The problem in the past has been that the scale of large industrial nuclear reactors is just too huge. You're talking these days tens of billions of dollars of capital spending. But small modular reactors are a technological game changer because they're very scalable. And I know back in the day, Premier Klein mused about the potential future of nuclear power to fuel resource extraction in the Canadian oil sands. That was considered a bit pie in the sky back in the 90s, but it's no longer the case with SMRs. And in fact, I've been in some very interesting discussions with the heads of our largest energy companies, and as they step up their investments in technology to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from the oil sands, they do believe that there may be a very real place for small modular nuclear reactors. So we're going to be working with other provinces, the energy industry, and the nuclear industry on developing that possibility.
Operator, can you please?
I'm sorry to I apologize for interrupting. I just did want to point out, again, that a study released 2 days ago confirmed that Alberta is leading Canada in new investments in renewable energy production, and we are doing that with zero taxpayer subsidies. We didn't need a carbon tax. We just needed, well, all we did was to create a pure energy market. And companies are able to come in here and invest in wind and solar as a complement to the power on our grid. So Alberta is making enormous progress, and we're doing that without the subsidies that come from a carbon tax. I should also point out, and I meant to mention this, that yesterday the Federal Environment and Climate Change Canada Department produced a study which confirms that the Alberta levy on major industrial greenhouse gas emitters covers over 60% of emissions, whereas the federal carbon tax covers, I believe, only 17% of emissions in the Canadian economy. So the notion that Alberta is the bad actor in the federation on this is the opposite of the reality. We have been leaders from day one on these issues.
Operator, can you please put through our next caller?
Dave Kaiser, 660 News.
Hi, good morning, Premier. Wondering what the costs of the legal challenge have been so far, and with the Supreme Court ruling, is your government prepared to accept the fact that Alberta lost here and move on with the carbon pricing scheme, or will this just be another entry into the long list of Alberta's ongoing legal challenges?
Well, let me say that, obviously it's a majority decision of the Supreme Court. There's no court that we can appeal this to. But when it comes to complying with this decision, we're going to do it in a way that imposes the lowest possible cost on Albertans. And by the way, just because the court says that the federal government can punish people for filling up their gas tanks and driving to work and heating their homes, doesn't mean that the federal government should do that. So this comes back to being a political issue, a democratic issue, which will be on the ballot in the next federal election. And I fully expect that the vast majority of Albertans, at least, who oppose this punitive carbon tax will vote to repeal it. So ultimately, this will be up to Canadian voters. I can tell you what Alberta voters think about this. They gave this government the largest Democratic mandate in Alberta history to repeal the NDP carbon tax as our first act and to sue the federal government over the constitutionality of their tax. And let me just say, there were a lot of people throughout this, a lot of the so-called clever commentators who said that this was that we were just tilting at windmills and this was all just some kind of a political ploy. We won a 4-1 decisive decision at the highest court in Alberta. We now have a third of the Supreme Court of Canada validating our position. We didn't get a majority, but it's clear that the position taken not just by Alberta, but by 6 of the provinces representing 80% of Canada's population was a strong and credible position. It's a challenge that had to be made. And no, we're not going to back down on defending our jobs, our economy, and our powers under the Federation to threats like Bill C-69 will continue to keep our election commitment to defend our powers and our economy.
We have time for one more question. Operator, can you please put through our last caller?
Our last question comes from Charlotte Desmoulins of Radio Canada.
Oui, bonjour, M. Kenney. Maintenant que le jugement de la Cour suprême est tombé, pouvez-vous nous expliquer ce que vous allez faire? Donc, allez-vous travailler avec Ottawa et ou mettre en place votre propre taxe sur le carbone? Je vais avoir une question de relance pour vous après.
Évidemment, nous sommes déçus avec la décision de la Cour suprême aujourd'hui. L'Alberta a gagné une victoire importante auprès du Cour d'appel de l'Alberta. Ça fait 1 an. Aujourd'hui, la Cour suprême a donné les nouvelles pouvoirs au gouvernement fédéral qui n'existent pas auparavant dans la Constitution canadienne. Ça nous inquiète. Mais quant aux questions de taxes sur le carbone, on va consulter les Albertains et les autres provinces, nos alliés, pour déterminer le meilleur politique au futur. Notre considération, notre critère principal sera quelle politique va imposer les moins de coûts possibles sur les familles albertaines. Quelle politique va cause le dommage minimal sur l'économie albertaine. Ça, c'est la considération principale. Thank you very much, everyone. Oh, OK.
J'avais une autre question, M. Kenney?
Certainement.
Oui, alors, c'était votre promesse de campagne électorale d'éliminer la taxe sur le carbone. Avez-vous peur que ça ait un impact sur le mouvement indépendantiste en Alberta?
Je crois que les gens qui sont contre le Canada ont déjà eu leur point de vue. Écoutez, évidemment, il y a des frustrations envers les politiques fédérales depuis longtemps ici. Mais je dirais que nous pouvons changer ces politiques avec les prochaines élections fédérales et le gouvernement de l'Alberta va continuer à lutter pour cette province, pour nos industries de ressources et pour l'économie et les emplois. Merci beaucoup.